I love that one. It's got all the goodness to it, right? Better solution, better for the world, better for privacy, and it helps make the vendor.
Welcome to this episode of the One Clear Thing series. Today, we continue our conversation with Allsbrook, the co-founder and CTO at ClearBlade. During our previous meeting, we explained the concept of IoT Edge and how ClearBlade assists business users in utilizing data from connected devices. Today, we continue exploring the business potential of IoT by leveraging AI capabilities and meeting the further needs of modern enterprises. Looking past the hype, we'll try to answer the essential question: how does AI apply to IoT and can it effectively run on the edge devices? Hello Aaron, it's great to see you again.
Hey Lukasz, good to see you as well. Thank you for having me one more time.
Yeah, that's actually the final time during this video series, so let's make it a good one. Let's start with the past. So you designed the ClearBlade way before the AI hype started. At which point on the timeline you realized that the AI is a valid addition to your offering and you should do something about it?
Well, we actually had our second or third customer all the way back at the beginning was running a Bayesian algorithm in us way back then. But I had no idea how it would fit into our product. So I can tell you that I saw AI beginning to fit all the way in the 2015, 2016 versions of ClearBlade. But ultimately, we really saw how it fit into our product probably about in 2020 was where it became, oh, we do belong in this life cycle. We can help customers be more successful with it. We can be both the feeder and then also be the inferencing side of that. So while there were visions and patterns that were set in place almost 10 years ago now, really it was in the last 4 where we saw, hey, this is what's going on in AI. And we now see enough devices, enough information that we think that this can apply to us. If we imagine back to the beginning of that AI hype cycle, it was all about looking at Twitter sentiment and that kind of stuff, right? It's so far disconnected from the world that we live in with devices.
Exactly. So what makes AI so compelling for enterprises? You mentioned the Twitter sentiment and other just experiments with AI, but for whatever reason, the enterprises really looking into AI as a huge enabler. So what kind of outcomes they can expect?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what we see AI doing is it's similar as it is for us internally, right? It's improving our processes. The last year we've seen Gen AI jump into a lot of processes for kind of manual tasks of creating text of different types of communication. But really we see AI, replacing an inspection. Can it do inspection better for us in an automated way? We see AI doing monitoring better for us without us having to go out and look at it in the field. We see AI helping us understand where our customers are in physical locations. So really it's basically giving us a better data feed, a better understanding of what's happening based upon the information we've already gathered. And reducing the cost of us ultimately having to monitor our stuff that we've always had in the field, always been doing for many years.
You mentioned that you use AI internally in order to improve the ClearBlade's platform itself? We
do. So, I mean, we've got it as part of our product, but we also use AI to look at what's going on in the underneath set of logs and metrics and heaps and dumps. You can imagine IoT solution from one place to the next looks very different. Sometimes it's one device sending lots of data very frequently. Sometimes it's lots of devices with big payloads once a day. So trying to understand if an environment is healthy or not often has to do with learning on the environment and then basically being able to trend what's going on in the memory, in the stack, in the queues. So yeah, we actually do run AI processes at the lowest level underneath, just looking to make sure we have a healthy environment. This kind of stuff pulls out anomaly behavior in devices. Sometimes that anomaly is maybe a third-party threat. Sometimes that anomaly is they pushed a bad firmware update. But ultimately, us finding that kind of stuff, it's just too much data for us to mine. And, sometimes our alerts are just too heavy, error, not error, right? We're looking for more nuanced things that trend in a direction. And that's where we're using AI internally. We're certainly using it in business processes as well, like a lot of other companies. But that's where I think it's kind of unique to an IoT company running large infrastructure.
You mentioned something very interesting, which is using AI to distinguish between the potential incident, like the hack attempt, or misused by a user that basically doesn't know what he's doing or doing something that is not typical for that specific use case. And I think even for humans, sometimes it is very difficult to distinguish if that's a hack attempt or not. And having AI that gives you that broader perspective is crucial in order to actually evaluate that incident, right?
Attack threats are always getting more sophisticated, right? So, there are ways that we look to, that we identify not in correct regions, data rates, time of days, what device being reused. So there are things like that that can call out threat actors, but they get more sophisticated as well. But really what we're trying to do is find anomalous behavior as quick as we can and escalate it to our teams, to our customers. This is what we see going on. And more often than not, the security measures are doing what they're supposed to do. It's just that the system has a new firmware behavior, a new API call that we didn't know about, right? And so then that kind of stuff keeps us all well informed and better informed and lets us set what the new normal is for the operating environment.
Exactly, because the IoT environment is like a living and breathing creature. So it constantly evolves. And as you said, you need to constantly track and learn what is the new normal instead of some misuse. But let's go back to the original topic. If you could give us a very clear value proposition of running AI at the edge devices from the business perspective without going into much more details at this stage.
There's been a very clear progress of computers over the years. There used to be a big mainframe in the bank, and everybody kind of had terminals to it, and then we moved to PCs, and we had them at our desk, and we learned the value of being able to compute locally and do what we're doing. Then we went to the internet because it was easy for everybody to get apps quickly, and then we moved to our mobile. It was back and forth, right? And we see that as well with now cloud and edge. There's wonderful things about the cloud. We love the cloud, but we know that the edge is going to be a huge part of our future in our overall ecosystem of how we're doing compute. So if you think about now, you've got a computer that can do everything the cloud could do, but you can do it at the small scale. You really have the opportunity to save cost over time, to be more efficient with the data, to guarantee some hardening of the environment. And then with AI, it's really a lot about speed. You're not necessarily interested in sending data that might be private, so privacy can improve. So we really do think that the amount of remote computing is becoming ubiquitous. It's showing up everywhere, right? People are putting these things in the field, anticipating the future. So the idea that you could begin to leverage that remote location for the speed, for maybe the purpose-builtness of the hardware, right? It might be designed for certain AI-like behaviors. It might be designed to handle the privacy. Really, we think AI is just going to become part of the inferencing or life cycle of IoT processing. You will just AI process, you will just inference as part of getting your data and enriching it from your devices. So we really are seeing AI drive edge deployments. I mean, up until now, agents seemed good enough for a lot of people, meaning they just wanted to get the data from the device and send it to the cloud. This idea of inferencing, this idea of processing, this idea of acting off of that AI, kind of putting some intelligence in the field really is making edge much more interesting, right? Now we're going to be able to accomplish stuff because we have intelligence at that remote location.
You mentioned quite a few things, and let's go a bit deeper and decompose the typical AI workflow. Because what we need to start with is just deploy devices to gather basic telemetry data and send to some kind of backend system. Then we need to leverage experts to assign labels to these data sets to provide data about data. So if this is data from the working machine, or maybe this machine is malfunctioning for whatever reason, then data scientists take that data to train models using the backend infrastructure, and we can utilize backend infrastructure to run those models against the new telemetry data. So we improve those models, and after some time we can optimize those models to the point that they are ready to deploy to the edge. So this is more or less how the full cycle looks like. How can customers leverage ClearBlade at every stage of that cycle?
You led by asking, when did we know AI belonged, right? And I think one of the challenges is what you just defined. That's just computers, right? You can use a lot of those tools. You get the data, you cleanse the data, you normalize it into structures, you turn it all into zeros and ones or type easy values. You find a couple different models, you test them and see which one works the best. right? That model, when it's all said and done, is just kind of a descriptor file. So that's been out there, and quite frankly, data scientists are going to use the tools they know how to use, right? So the idea that ClearBlade would come in and say, now we're an AI tool and we're going to replace the AI tools, that's silly, right? That's not what companies want to do. They've mastered certain tool sets with their vendors of choice or their tools of choice, and we want to empower them. So what we say is our job then is to get that data as best structured as we can to those tools, to those data scientists. We never trap data, or we will flow data wherever it needs to go, including into those large data stores for the training process. Where also, you split that, you put about 20% into your testing process. So you train on 80 and then you go and you validate your results with the other 20% of data. So we obviously work very, very hard to take the data to where it can be trained and built on. We have great data partners already, or AI partners with companies like SAS and Google, where those tools, literally work almost kind of out of the box, where we'll stream that data right where it belongs. That process of finding the best model, there are tools for that as well. Some companies like SAS will practically give you the best model and run all the different permutations. Others, you kind of manually go through that life cycle on your own. But once you've produced that model, it's now the question of, great, how do I put this back into the flow, right? So if you think about it, the data came in, it might have said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for its values. You have to normalize it into 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Monday is 0. So you have to kind of build that process into your data flow. So you have to put what was that kind of normalization, standardization into your data flow. And then the model, you basically have to wrap it in an API. A lot of the clouds wrap it in a REST API, meaning you can now call it from HTTP. We actually try to wrap it in MQTT pub sub kind of flow, so we'll be able to leverage the speed and performance of our IoT systems. But ultimately, now the data comes in, it still has its standard life cycle into your telemetry feeds and stuff, but you also then go through that little normalization into the model interpreter, and then you inference, and then you send that inference data down as well into it. So kind of a diversion of pipelines, so you'll still pipeline the AI outside of it, but ultimately that's what we're making easy. So now all you got to do is wrap it in this MQTT service, and you have to then move the model and the service to the remote location, and it drops right into the normal flow that's going on. That's where ClearBlade's focused. It's basically putting that data to work. We give the data, we do great at that. We did great at that for years. Now it is that AI model running in the real-time workflow of AI. That's what ClearBlade does. That is certainly powerful and very compelling for those trying to get value from all these AI models they built. I think the statistics are pretty poor for a number of models that aren't actually used, right? So really the encumbrance to getting models into the field is really, how do you put it back to work?
Exactly, and I love the approach that you used by using MQTT, because MQTT is native for IoT deployments. Devices deployed in the field got access to that inference by using the protocol they use anyhow to communicate with your platform. That is very, very smart. It reduces the complexity, and at the same time, it enables that many-to-many communication model provided by MQTT. So I think that is a really good approach.
We like the design too, because we can run the models in flow inside of ClearBlade, but it's entirely possible people have created models that are written in other languages that are compiled separately. So they can still even actually take that model, and as long as they follow the same pub sub patterns, they can actually put outside of our process and yet still inject back into our pipelines. So really, it's a nice way to kind of have abstract pipelines, whether in us or outside of us, the data still flows the same.
Exactly, and we've got the common language, so to speak, which is MQTT, and some models can run at the edge, other may run in backend, various types of backends, as you just said. It's not only about sending telemetry data, it's also about sending that output of processing of inference back to the devices so they can use that data and optimize some process, or maybe trigger some fails at the edge that something is going wrong, not the way it should have.
We talked in the last session a little bit about our digital twins, right? And so once you've turned this thing into a real asset, you do have to take action, right? And so it is a bi-directional thing. What are we going to do in that building? What are we going to do at that truck? All the different things that might happen, we're able to support by basically having that common flow pipeline language, so to speak.
Speaking about running AI model directly at the edge? Can customers use ClearBlade to deploy those AI models to the edge devices remotely?
If you look at what's really happened, we've just made a file, right? And so it's an extra file that has to get moved to an edge and then picked up. So we support that natively as part of our edge, right? We've always kind of said you got to process, you got to move things back and forth, whether you're taking an image from the edge, bring it to the cloud, a log file, or whether you want to move an AI model back down and then run it in the process. So yes, we support all of that. We do it with the concept called deployments. Deployments basically say we're taking this bit of cloud pieces and technology, we're deploying it to edge 1 and through 7, and this other set of technology moves to different edges depending upon what the purpose of the edge is going to be. So we absolutely support that, and we support it at that kind of model layer. I think that's kind of unique as well. It's not that we're forcing a container and pulling a container, but it's individual files. So you can do patterns that allow you to say a unique model for each edge, a unique set of models for each edge. So you're not forced to deploy the same model in all use cases if you don't want to.
Exactly, because those models are often purpose-built, especially for edge devices, because you want to make those models as efficient as possible, running potentially on constrained devices. So you don't want to deploy a huge generic model at the whole fleet. You want to be very specific about what capabilities you deploy to which devices, which I believe is very smart of you, that you provide that functionality to the end users.
It's fascinating what you learned, and I probably in the last couple of years have learned about how detailed these models can be. I used to think one model might do everything, and there's been amazing things I've seen with one leak protector model working across many different environments. But then there's other times where in one solar field, just because you change the component of the combiner box or whoever the manufacturer, you need a completely different model, right? So one edge now is running different models for different types of equipment out there that all do the exact same thing. It's interesting how this space works and how detailed it can become.
It is even more interesting once you put that thing into the actual use in a field. I've got a question regarding exactly that. So what are the common challenges and pitfalls you observe when you remotely deploy and run models in a field on actual devices processing actual real-life data?
I'll start with the initial challenges. There's a lot of unknowns in the initial investment for customers. Will we be able to predict something valuable? I talked about how we built AI to look at our own stacks and stuff. When we started that journey, we weren't really sure we were going to get good predictions any better than some old-fashioned rules. So there is often a journey that goes a little bit with around, are we going to be able to make some compelling ROI delivering models when it's all said and done? I think that's the first challenge you have to get through. We've had some huge successes far beyond what we expected. We've seen other folks do some investments to kind of find out what they might have known already, right? That they could predict these things without necessarily needing a model. In general, we've seen ROI from most things that get into the field, or at least learnings towards the ROI. I'll say the challenges is these environments aren't often static in terms of the equipment and what's happening. So where you might have trained a model on a certain amount of wattage or a certain amount of type of component or a certain quality of environment, we certainly will see the models change based upon maintenance that it gets done in those environments. We've seen some AI make predictions that kind of ruin the maintenance cycles, meaning that they are so good at telling people how to do it, and if they did it correctly, suddenly you have to ask yourself, do we even need to do maintenance anymore? So process change is never easy. But ultimately, once you've kind of figured out the motions of how to do it, the challenge then becomes around how do we make sure it's still working the right way like we expected, and then how do we make sure we're now using this new technology to the highest and best value that we can get from it.
Yeah, so actually you mentioned quite a few things that I would like to decompose. One is let's say, one of the core truths in the AI space, which means the garbage in, garbage out. If you provide a wrong set of inputs for the model, or if you train that model on wrong data, then you will get the wrong prediction. And this is what you said. Once you deploy that model to the actual usage, you never know, you cannot guarantee any fixed outcomes, right? You hope that it will work, as you said, but this is always the high risk investment, I would say. And of course, you can get the great results out of it, but sometimes it requires a few iterations. And having ClearBlade as essentially the framework that allows you to repeat that cycle without worrying about the fleet management, without worrying about how to access those remote locations, you've got that covered, right? That now what customer needs to figure out is the actual value of data they gather. And this is data they own, right? This is data generated by their devices and their IT systems as well. So there is nothing else you can do, essentially. You provide all the tooling, you provide the processes, and you can support your customers, but it's up to them if they can figure out how to put all of that capabilities into actual use. So this is very, very important.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a customer we had that owned a water network. So imagine a water utility for pumping water through a city. And they did AI with us to try to find leaks. We looked at historicals about, where maintenance had been done. We had data about the pipe quality and who did it. We had all the pressures and flows in real time. So we could see all kinds of trends of, and in the end, we produced an AI model that could tell people where leaks were, because essentially it had found, this type of pipe installed this time of year, this many years ago, maybe by a certain person, whatever trend it found. It very quickly identified you probably have leaks in these 300 spots. And when they went out, they found 300 leaks in those spots, right? It was pretty wild. I was shocked, right? I had no idea it would work that well. But essentially, they were able to immediately discover. The problem is they then fixed all that, right? And so now all of our training data, they repaired. And I'm like, well, we got to do this again, right? We got to figure out what the next combination of things most likely means we have water loss. So even when you find a huge ROI, then you have to ask yourself, is the rectification or whatever we're doing here, is that going to reset what our expectations are of this solution?
But this is constant cycle, right? And once you've got that foundation, that framework, those processes established, of course, once you change the living environment, which is the IoT devices and devices operated and monitored by those IoT devices, then the whole thing changed. But you can basically start a new iteration, leveraging the knowledge that you gather, and potentially provide additional outcomes. Maybe not as spectacular as the one that you just said, but still, yeah, there is plenty of ways to optimize that the whole thing works. And one thing that is very important from my perspective is sometimes using just simple rule engine is good enough. As you said, that we've got some rules and we've got those models. And for some scenarios, in my opinion, the AI is overkill, and some customers try to push for AI because it is so fancy and a pretty simple rule engine would do. But in other cases, as the one that you just provided, a rule model cannot provide you that outputs, right? Because you need to find a balance in how to approach any specific case.
A lot of times we look for where rules are too noisy, or where we can't figure out the rule that makes the most sense. Solar panel, for example, it's pretty easy to say, are we hitting an expected threshold of power generated throughout a day? Sun comes up, we get power, we don't get power. But it's very hard to understand if a cloud went by, right? Even if it's cloudy, what should we be getting at this moment, right? And suddenly there's a lot more complexity in that rule, and AI is a good fit. We see it and there's a lot of times where it's kind of compounding or confounding variables working together that show you and inference out the value you can't really understand. And so that's where we really look for this clearly knowing these values, the speed, the temperature. We obviously can predict whether the bearing is failing or not, right? Those kind of models are fantastic because they attack maintenance cycles, they attack outage time, but yet they're also things we can't write that simple rule for to immediately understand. In our case, it's how many queues are waiting to be processed in the stack underneath the covers while data flows in, right? And that should be a lot, but it should be a lot kind of continually, maybe throughout the day cycle, but it shouldn't explode to 1 million. CPU usage is another good example. There's all times where CPUs spike up and down. Is it a normal spike? Is it not a normal spike? Those kinds of things AI can really kind of help you figure out.
That is correct. Just going out of this topic, because you mentioned something that is extremely fascinating to myself personally, is that CPU monitoring. You want to keep your CPU load between certain levels in order to utilize the hardware that you've got, right? You don't want to run it on, let's say, 30% of capacity just in case you got unexpected load. But at the same time, you don't want to push it to, let's say, 80% all the time because the margin is too low. I think it's more the science of how to design the whole system as a single organism, so to speak, that can absorb load. I know this is a topic for different conversation, but that's a great example of how to design the whole system and use AI just as part of many different controls you've got in place in order to keep your fleet or your system operational.
Now, even in that use case, the value of AI is, you might have got your margins of health in that one CPU spike, but the value of AI is when it spikes, is there more to come? What's the future going to be, right? And because it's slow to, cloud infrastructure is amazing. It's so much faster to get a server than it was when to buy one back in the day, right? But to bring up a new server and to have it join and have it get warm takes minutes. So, if you got to have that extra headroom, but then you also have to know when it's time to call in and expand that cluster and to bring more on. And AI helps you make that decision with a little more visibility and more data backing it up.
That is correct. And it provides you that wider perspective, because if you add, let's say, more CPU power, that might just move the issue from your application servers down the line to the database, for instance, right? So actually, you will not solve the core of the problem. You will just make one metric happy and you pretend that everything is absolutely right. But let's go back on track. And if you could provide us some customer stories leveraging AI and ClearBlade capabilities. You already mentioned few, but for sure you've got way more stories to tell.
I'll talk about kind of a retail one because I like this one. Retailers and brick and mortar stores always want to know where their customers are. It's well known that when you go to a store and somebody says hello to you, shakes your hand, greets you, and then shows up right when you have the good question, that you're more likely to buy stuff, right? I mean, it's like 6 to 20% more larger shopping cart baskets, for that kind of engagement. Small stores often can see all customers at one time, right? That's why the little retail boutiques can move certain amounts of products. It gets hard as stores get bigger. So how do you bring kind of a personalized approach in a big store, potentially with a large fleet of customer reps walking around the store, doing normal store maintenance activities? We have a partner that took ClearBlade and basically made it so we could use existing security cameras, do edge-based processing, so process that feed directly to know dwell times of customers. So now when you go to the store and you're on a big aisle where nobody can see you other than the security camera, we're actually looking and saying, hey, we see you standing in the paint at the home goods store, right? We know that you're looking for paints. Are you shopping for paints? Are you trying to pick the right paint? Are you trying to pick the right brushes? And so at that moment, when we calculate the dwell time for that location on that camera, we then can send the alert to the sales rep and say, hey, there's a person, aisle 9, they're shopping your product set. Go help them right now. Engage them in this moment, this shopping moment. You and I both have probably stood on aisles, finally decided and just went to the front and, leave it at that. We didn't buy the extra pieces, that sort of stuff that we probably needed. So that's a really cool one. That one is fascinating because, number one, it makes, a certain amount of staff more compelling and more powerful, right? The same number of people now can engage customers in a better way while they're doing normal activities, right? They may be doing restocking and stuff, but they can now engage into that workflow and increase that basket size. The other thing that really is great is it's the edge processing. Not sending your picture to the cloud is key. It's something that technology has not been good at, which is protecting privacy. And this is the ultimate privacy case. My face never leaves the store. My face can live on that edge just long enough to make that inferencing, and then it can be deleted. And so it's forgotten. So really, I was this live video stream with all my personal data of my facial description. I've turned into customer 91 on aisle 7 for 45 seconds. And that's all the data that comes out of that. So one, we've treated the customer with a lot more respect and respect of their privacy. Two, we've been able to engage them better, hopefully give them a better experience. And three, ideally, we've raised the overall basket of how much the customer purchases as they exit. So I love that one. It's got all the goodness to it, right? Better solution, better for the world, better for privacy, and it helps make the vendor more money. That's one that's a great example of edge. And the other one that, well, any questions about that one? I've got one more good one too.
Yeah, just to comment that, to be honest, I would not think about that specific example as a typical IoT deployment, because when we were talking about the leakage, the pumps, the trucks, this is typical IoT landscape, right? But all of a sudden, you use the same capabilities to provide totally different outcomes in totally different verticals, essentially using the same framework that you just created, but the mindset is absolutely different. And I love that. I'm really happy that you bring this example, because it might open a few ideas in the customers that never thought about themselves as being target audience for IoT. But actually, the IoT is just a generic capability. And as you describe, it can be utilized not only if you operate heavy equipment.
If you think about in a retail store, shopping carts are moving around. Where are they, right? You want to count people as they come in so you know occupancy. There's different sensors for that. So, I mean, these environments are full of IoT devices. There's potentially dynamic signage, right? Maybe they're changing pricing. There's all different kind of margin solutions of IoT going on, ultimately to improve the customer experience and increase the overall basket as it comes out the door. So, when I picked the part of that I really liked about Edge AI, but IoT is going on across that store, whether it's the workers and what they might be wearing to the different sensors that are making sure that we understand how to best optimize the flow and the finding of what people want.
Perfect. So now please give us the second example that you had.
Sure. So the other one is, and again, I love this because I just said a whole bunch of words about retail that I never really knew, right, until you do this, right? So I learned a whole business domain, similar when you think about drilling, right? So the process of drilling for petroleum. Talk about a complex domain. There's a whole set of engineers who are dedicated to how do you push through the rock, how do you turn angles, how do you go down, how do you find areas. If you're going to do the fracking process, how do you put the right charge in there then to drive the pressure up? How do you push the right amount of liquid in that causes the petroleum to come back up, right? There's this whole world of how do you drill this hole at the right speed as fast as possible to get the best results coming back out. And people way smarter than me know all of that. What's interesting is they've learned all of that, and very often they had to learn it back in their offices far away from the drill site. And they just wrote hard rules for how you might do your drilling process. When the temperature gets this high, slow down the speed of the drill, those sorts of things. When the pressure is this hard, back off. So ultimately, as that drill moves through the earth, it's going to encounter different densities of rock. It's going to encounter different hardnesses. So really, you're having to change the speed and the pressure you push down on that drill bit in as best time as you can as the driller in the field. If you do a good job, that means that same drill bit can be used over and over. If you don't do it very well, you're either going to break the bit, which means you have to pull all the pieces out and replace them, or you're going to drill very, very slowly. And the one guy is going to drill a well in a week, and yours is going to take a month. And that's time to money. So it's fascinating because they've got so much knowledge about this process they've built up kind of by hand over the years of predicting of what they should do and when to build up these rules. The reality is these AI models at that, they sit in those places completely ready to be moved to the field. So if you think about it, moving that to the field and processing that data in real time wasn't possible until this latest wave of AI and this latest wave of IoT at the edge. So the idea that you can actually begin to take knowledge that we've been building in AI models since the 80s, right, and now drop that in the field and give that intrinsic prediction percentiles to the person in the field who's pulling the levers, telling them what to do in that exact moment. Very, very compelling use case for edge in a domain that very few of us think about, right? It's very, very important for all of us, but very, very few of us think about the magic that happens for that to work.
And this is a perfect example of what I say, that we need to codify the domain knowledge, right? You've got those people that are experts in drilling, and using AI and other techniques, you can actually codify what they've got in their heads, even their intuition to some extent, because intuition is just about taking into account number of factors that are not evident, but this is just input data, right? So you can codify all that and apply exactly where you need it. So at the edge, operate by the IoT device and utilize the AI on top of it. That is great example. And you mentioned something that is also very interesting, and in our previous conversation you also touched on it. So let's go a bit deeper. So you distinguish the traditional AI, and we've got that new trend called Gen AI. So could you elaborate on those two topics, how they differ, or maybe they can work together?
Original AI to me very often looked like math, right? I mean, you got to those kind of last few math classes in college, that statistics class, and suddenly magic was happening. You'd do math and you could suddenly say, oh, 82% of people are in this category, right? Like, I don't quite remember how all that magic worked. And so a lot of times, when you look at the Bayesian algorithms, the neural nets, you're like, I see math there going on to make a prediction. So that often makes a lot of sense for those of us who have lots of sensor feeds. Numbers come in, a prediction is made, it looks like math in the middle, right? We give it the fancy word of artificial intelligence and we say we inference, but the reality is it's a mathematical algorithm. What we see with Gen AI is a little different. We're not getting a probability out the other side. We're not getting a true, false, broken, not broken out the other side. Instead, we're being given back a structure that makes sense. It's generating, often it's human language, right? It's language that we would read, and doing an amazing job at it. So we've all asked the new, the search engines and stuff, and now we're getting answers back in written that looks kind of like a human wrote it. It's great for chatbots because if you give enough inputs of a large language for what you want the inputs to be and what you want the outputs to be, then these Gen AI models are great at giving you back the human language. We see them not only generating human language, we see them generating structures and configurations. Provided we give them enough inputs of what we want and the output examples, these large language models can actually give us the configuration we need to make our IoT solutions get configured faster, or ultimately get and more simplify the process of setting them all up and creating stuff for us. So we see them very differently. They are very different. One for us is math generating probabilities that we take action on. In the other case, it's taking a large set of inputs and then making some predictions for us to configure and do things better with.
You leveraged the Gen AI chatbot to bring the ClearBlade platform to the next level in terms of IoT platform and how it can be approached by, let's say, typical users. By typical users, I mean someone that is not IT expert and is not data scientist as well, right? Maybe you could give us a bit more understanding of how you achieve that and what users can expect from it.
Yeah, so I'm great at downplaying technology. So I always like to think about, if you think about back in the 90s, we would launch a wizard, right? And the wizard would come up and ask us just the right questions to do what we wanted to do. You want to create a new document, you want to create business cards, right? We had these wizards we used. In a lot of ways, I look at like we finally got a good wizard now, a wizard that understands us the way we want to talk. So ultimately, we can put this chatbot into our assistant, we call it, into Intelligent Assets. Intelligent Assets is a no-code tool. That means we've put front ends for every part of it. How you configure it, here's the dialog box, so to speak, and the form to fill it out. We now can actually populate all that setup and configuration from a simple conversation. Meaning if you're a car dealer and you say, I want to monitor all the license plates that we keep, or I want to monitor all the keys, right? This assistant knows how to generate what is a license plate asset type that has certain attributes, right? Numbers, dates, responsibility partners, all that stuff. It can automatically provide you to reduce that effort of understanding it. If you tell it you want police cars, it can infer both police means there's some sort of law enforcement associated with it, and infer the fact that it's a vehicle. So you're going to be able to get an asset that already has those two domains apply to it for attributes, for rules, for events that make sense for monitoring that particular asset. So really our goal is we want to shorten the amount of time it takes to get to a configured system. A lot of times is spent asking someone, well, what do you want to monitor and what is typical and why does that matter to you? So if Gen AI has already been able to parse the ecosystem for what we do, it can come back and suggest immediately, well, you want to know when the refrigerator's been stolen from the work site, right? And so we're going to create a work site for you. We're going to create the refrigerator for you, and we're going to keep its lat long, and we're going to keep a rule that's kind of a geofenced-based rule. So for us, it gets rid of the ideation. It potentially can reduce the amount of time where we're having to gather domain expertise with the customer. It reduces the amount of time the customer needs to ask us questions about how to set it up. So for us, that's where the assistant, the Gen AI assistant out of the box was kind of a home run, right? I mean, that really empowers people to use the tool and teaches them the tool. Oh, look at that. I asked for this and it created all of these things. That's really compelling. I see how they fit together now.
Well, that is actually brilliant because if I understand correctly, the chatbot generates not only the asset itself with some attributes, but it essentially generates all the hierarchy of those assets. So as you said, like the location, some objects within that location with their respective attributes and maybe additional devices attached to them. But also what it does, it generates the rules and attach those rules to the intelligent assets. So it gives you all of a sudden the working solution almost, right?
Yeah, and it's fascinating, right? So once you give somebody that basic structure that's in their terminology, right? You can't give them a truck if they're trying to do refrigerators, right? It just doesn't, it's hard to apply how it works. But if you get close to what they expect, then they'll instantly be able to say, oh, actually, I have a rule that says if it's Wednesdays, then I don't want this rule. Like suddenly they can articulate all the variables that go into how they do their day-to-day process from 8 to 5 or overnight. But you really have to get the domain kind of set up, and then it turns everybody loose. Then you suddenly understand how this makes sense at a railroad crossing versus how this makes sense, in a warehouse. So that's really what we've been able to do is, in the past, it took a sales engineer or someone on a demo to kind of get that juice flowing and turning people loose with their own environments for, a week or so. Now it's a matter of just tell it what you think you're doing and let's see what comes out and watch how close we are. And if we need to tinker, it's a no-code tool. We can change things later, down the line. But that's where we've begun with our Gen AI assistant, and it's already compelling just with that bit of functionality.
I love this approach, especially because I've seen a number of times when I was meeting with the customer, and if someone says that the AI can do whatever you need, so what do you need? Then all of a sudden no one knows what they need, right? And because it is very hard to actually define your requirements if you do not know the capabilities of the tooling, and you don't know capabilities of the tooling because you are the baker, not the IT guy. And what you just described is that the baker can just type the way that he or she thinks about the bakery and equipment and whatever and processes, and your little chatbot will do the magic, will populate all of those assets, and they will look and sound familiar, right? As you said, it will not generate a truck, or maybe for baker, actually truck might make sense because that truck will move the bread around, but it will feel that it is the environment that the person knows, and all of a sudden it opens up the flow, right? And everyone is on the same page, everyone is very clear what they expect, what the requirements are. From that, it is just the implementation. The best thing is that you know that what you're doing makes sense for the customer, because you don't want to sell someone something that they don't really like or need, because that feels pretty bad, right?
I feel like we have a successful customers when I go into their environment and they're having to explain everything to me and I'm holding on to understand it anymore, right? Like I'm the IT guy. I know how all the data is flowing. I know all the protocols. And suddenly they're saying, well, what it's doing is, it's got the backroom pressure here to make sure we understand. And I'm like, oh, wow, this tool has been fit directly into their domain. It's not full of my words or any ClearBlade words anymore. It's in how their vernacular, their business domain's doing it. So the faster we get someone there, the happier they are. Goodness, no one likes learning new tools. But certainly we know that there's real adoption and real value being had when suddenly I'm like, I think they're doing great, but I'm not quite sure what they're doing anymore. But all the data is flowing, right? And the servers are healthy. So that's really where we're going. And I'm sure it's probably true of like Salesforce customers, relations. Not every customer is the same, right? You want customers to be, matched to what the business is doing. And so, just like those industries work very hard to have one tool that can fit lots of needs, that's where Intelligent Assets is doing it. And we just happen to be using Gen AI to reduce that time of getting, your definition of your things, your assets the right way.
Speaking about customers and meeting their expectations, what is the most requested functionality by your customers that you are going to implement in the ClearBlade in the near future?
We're not done with AI by any stretch. I just talked about how we very much want to get to the customer business domain, the vernacular of the customer as fast as possible. There's still too many data science words in data science. You know what I mean? Like you and I just described it, and it is still a natural part for a customer to have a data scientist around. So we're working really hard. There's partners in the space that have reduced that complexity. So we fully intend to basically allow people to work in their business domain and say, I want to predict this. I want you to give me a prediction of it. I want you to automatically create a rule when my prediction doesn't match the actual. I want you to help me find what the features are that might drive that prediction. So because we've gotten to the business domain, we very much say, hey, we're in a great spot to begin to interrogate that end user, that business user, just the right way to ask the simple question that then we can go do all that gorpy math behind the scenes with data science. I'm sure there's always be a need for a data scientist to understand what's going on, but we believe we can bring that into the end user's world very quickly into their domain. Back to your point of, they hear stuff that kind of like those things, we want to make it easy for them to say, I think when this happens, that thing that the seal's bad or we're out of balance. And so we want to help people discover that without having to go through the data science journey themselves. That's one. So AI is key into our life cycle. The fact that we can do inferencing, we can partner with all of our great partners. We have a fantastic path for releasing features there. The other area is we're not done with Gen AI. If you think about what the long challenge in often IoT solutions is, it's unlocking data that's behind protocols. It's also can be about how to flow the data in the right way, right? How much do you cache before you move it down? That's all configuration in ClearBlade. Today, that's configuration done by maybe a protocol expert on BACnet. Or maybe it's done by a cloud expert who's optimizing Kubernetes or service flow. Those are all just configurations as well. So we really think Gen AI has got another major step for us to ultimately not only configure the business domain experience, unlock the protocols by just saying, here's the device I want to unlock. Let's see what comes through. Map this register to this attribute. But then also, make sure this system's healthy and can scale to 100,000, moving data into this third-party database that has, these data can accept data at this sort of pattern. So we're really looking to make the whole underlying IoT solution healthy, along with unlocking data that takes time right now much faster with Gen AI.
I'm waiting to see how you achieve that. So think about the future. What is the most significant upcoming breakthrough in the IoT domain that you're waiting for?
I want IoT to get easier. IoT is hard because it takes time for people to plug things in, and then nobody uses the same protocol or pattern for what data looks like. If you look at why some industries have moved fast is the data was already there, right? AI has done great because there's so much data sitting in databases already. I really want to help IoT unlock the data faster. You can't do that in an opinionated way. So while some of the hyperscalers set very specific ways the data must connect over this protocol, I want to think about it in terms of how do we go in and solve for all protocols in a faster manner. To me, that is a pattern where I think if we can help people get their data wherever it's from and then repackage it to where it needs to go and the right flows and caching along the way, that's really going to unlock IoT to the scale we all know it needs. And IoT isn't just about trying to find, where ClearBlade can grow. There's a tremendous amount of margin in society that's wasted. We can be better as a human race in energy usage and all these things just by optimizing this stuff. So there's urgency behind this from my perspective. The sooner we can optimize these processes, we can make it safer for people, we can save the energy along the way, we can save people money so they can live at a higher quality of life. There's just so much we can do, but we've got to figure out how to unlock this and speak all these disparate languages and then move it to where it needs to go and then react back and forth. So for me, that path, that journey to making any protocol completely accessible, that's where my vision for IoT becomes probably pie in the sky, but also really, really compelling for what we can do.
Well, I think that's a great vision, especially that there used to be that saying that the IT stuff needs to be difficult because then the IT consultants can get paid a huge amount of money just to solve issues. They created themselves in a way. That's a bit of stretch, but I think there is some truth behind it. And what you just said is quite opposite, that you want to give that capability to the end users. And this is your mission, and you see greater value than just pure money out of doing that. And I think this is great approach, and I really respect that, because this creates that trust, right? This creates that thing that you are the trusted partner of your customers, because you don't try to trick them, and people can feel that if they are being tricked or not. So I think that was a consistent theme for all of those conversations that we had, that it's all about creating those capabilities and making it as easy and straightforward to use for the user, so they do not need you anymore, right? You just need to make sure that the whole thing underneath will work smoothly, and they will take it from there, which is basically the sweet spot. And this is the win-win scenario for both of you, you and your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end, the whole theme today with the AI, right? We've got to make edge AI, which is an incredibly hard problem. We've got to make it easy, right? That's what we all need to be, where the world's going to head. That's how we're going to get value and achieve some of those results. But in the end, us being able to step back and let their expertise just use the tools and the information we give them, that is the perfect goal of ClearBlade.
Let's summarize this episode, because we covered number of topics, as always with you, Aaron, and it was a pleasure. We started from the AI hype and how to achieve real value using AI and IoT technology, how the whole process works of starting from telemetry data all the way to having fine-tuned model and being able to deploy that model to the edge itself. We provided a number of real-life examples that shows the AI capabilities not only in the heavy equipment space, but also retail and whatever else we can imagine. And you summarized with actually using IoT for greater good and use the modern tools like AI, Gen AI, and all of that in order to make the whole thing easier to operate and provide value to the end users and actually to all of us, because that would basically increase the level of life for every human if used at scale. So that's quite a lot of topics. Once again, I need to have a single message from you that summarized this episode and actually the whole series of interviews that I had the pleasure to make with you.
Well, I mean, I think I'll go back to the title of this one is AI is the app, the killer app for the edge, right? I think we're just now understanding AI and big clouds with big cloud bills associated with them. I think for us to hit this goal of the optimized, performant, private and secure AI moving to the edge is the one major point we, as a takeaway from today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Aaron. Once again, that was a pleasure to speak with you and to hear your thoughts on various topics.
Thanks, Lukasz. Enjoyed it.
Next time, I will meet with Brent Chandler, the Vice President of Sales at ClearBlade, to discuss how enterprises can embrace Internet of Things mindset and track the readiness of using IoT and how they can actually start the process. Maybe not from technical perspective as we did today, but more from the organizational perspective, how to start and what are the next step that will take you to where you want to be. Thank you for watching this episode. Please put your questions in comments as we will answer them live during the final stream that will conclude this video series. Till next time, I'm your host, Lukasz Malinowski.